Today's general belief system, however, is that more is better, regardless of how little is left for anyone else. I have a cousin who was British, came with us when he was 18 because his mother died. And his dad was somewhat of a derelict, I guess. Anyway, having been through the war where there was scarcity, during World War II, that I remember we were told to save string. Well, he had a ball of string. He'd take the string, he'd knot it together, and he'd roll it up in the ball. At some point, that ball crossed the threshold in which he could not bring himself to take a piece of string off of it because he began to feel string pool. He ended up with a ball of string so damn big it had to be housed in the garage, and he couldn't touch it. He couldn't take a piece of string off. That ball of string owned him at that point. My dad, who was orphaned twice, put in orphanages very unceremoniously, had a valuable painting and he kept it in the closet because he was afraid somebody would steal it. I asked him once if he ever enjoyed it. He'd have to open the closet to look at it. He knew it was there, but he couldn't. It owned him for his whole life because he was afraid of losing it. That's our basic fear, is fear of loss. So when you have enough, you don't have the fear of loss because you can always start over. But if you have too much, my God, in the U.S., I don't know how it is here, we have storage units. What they are metal compartments for garbage that people can't let go of, and they pay for, and they never look at. And they're exploding all over the landscape. I find the euphemism of sanitary landfills to be ridiculous. The notion of and fear of scarcity is not necessarily an inherited part of human nature. It's a contrived part of economics to force people to buy, to create competition, to raise prices. Today's scarcity, although largely an economic construct to foster consumerism, which we in the U.S. are very good at, and increase profits, is perceived to be real and ever-present because if I don't get it now, all I want, somebody else will get it, which means there will be less for me. That's how corporations often justify housing developments, clear cutting. I've been in court, I've had this argument with them, and their answer always is, well, if you can guarantee me the next generation won't cut those trees, then we'll leave them. But if they're going to cut them, we might as well have it. And the point is, our responsibility is to leave the unconditional gift for the future. It is not either our right or responsibility to judge how they spend that inheritance. It is, after all, theirs. They, in turn, are responsible to the next generation. That's what sustainability is. But it has to be given as unconditional gift. If I give this gentleman sitting here, it's his 40th birthday, and he's on a diet, I don't know. So I bring him a chocolate cake as a gift. What I'm telling him is, I love you enough to have made this cake. But he can't eat it. He's diabetic. So he gives it to his neighbor. Or he eats it because he thinks, I expect that. If he eats it, then I haven't given him a gift. I've given him a prison cell. If he can freely give it to his neighbor, then I've given a true gift because a gift has no liens or encumbrances. It is free of charge. I've given a gift twice because I gave him the freedom to give it to somebody else. There's an adage in Christianity, which I don't think many people understand, but indigenous cultures do. That is, giving is receiving, but the part of that that's missing is receiving is giving. Because if this gentleman does not graciously accept my cake, I can't give it. His gracious acceptance of it allows me to give. So he gave me the gift of giving to him. Gifts are always reciprocal relationships. There's no relationship that's one-sided. That's what we have to learn. There's always a consequence. Always a trade-off. I don't care gives the gift to his neighbor, I'm just telling him I love him with a token. Because words can't express it. The token he can touch, it's tangible, that's real. Living in a society in which work, socializing, and play form an inclusive, seamless whole that does not depend on individual production in order to participate fosters social equality. The sense of having enough in social and environmental sustainability. Today, individual well-being is limited strictly to individual production, has led to competition, and continues to inevitably lead to scarcity and poverty and environmental degradation. What we're saying is we're not okay as people. We have to produce. What we produce is how we are valued. What happened to just being human? What happened to the human scale of relationships? What happened to caring about your neighbor? Sharing life's experience and necessities are inherited traits of our species that are manifested through caring for one another in such a way that human well-being is not only served, but also a part of environmental sustainability. If I argue for your dignity, I allow you to argue for mine, and if we cooperate, we have a much better environment because we're not stripping it for ourselves at the cost of the future. Because the future is part of what we take care of. Why do you think people plant trees? Because we have a sense of being here such a short time. If you plant a tree in honor of a loved one, you are extending the continuity of existence. How would we feel if the oldest living beings on earth, the trees were all cut, and none of them lived longer than we did? What would that do to our psyche when you look at the immensity of the universe in the night sky? We would be diminished as we have diminished the forests. Because when you look at a 2,000-year-old tree, there was one in Wheeler National Park in Nevada. Bristlecone pine, 5,500 years old. Some knothead was going to age it, and they got an increment core stuck in it. You know what that is? It's a little hollow tube you drill into the heart of a tree, and then you count the rings. So the knotheads cut it down to count the rings. 5,500 and some years old, and they proudly show it in the museum. But think what that tree could tell. It goes back to the biblical time of Moses, for heaven's sakes. Think what that tree could tell if it could talk, or a rock. But also look at touching that tree, living. You're touching the continuity of thousands of years, and that tree will live beyond you. You've been a little part of that tree. I started writing the book, The Perpetual Conscience of Fear and Violence, when they blew up the bridges of Kosovo, because it occurred to me that children will have to have the material they could use for peaceful means stripped from them in order to rebuild the bridge. And think of all the stories that bridge could tell. From its inception, the first person who had the idea for the bridge, the people who discussed it, the people who designed it, the people who built it, and everyone who's used it. Those stories are irreplaceable. They're all part of that bridge, and it would have gone on as continuity for that community, blown up in an instant because people couldn't get along. That's one of the things that I find very interesting about religion, except for a couple, Buddhism and Taoism. I don't know they've ever started battles. But most of the religions of today have destroyed the world and are doing so through war, each of them to prove who is the most peaceful.